Let me start with something that might sting a little. If you've spent most of your life quietly feeling behind, watching people your age hit milestones you haven't, wondering when your turn is finally going to come, I need you to hear this. That feeling isn't proof that you're failing. Really often, it's the opposite, because there's a whole category of people who don't peak early, they peak late. And on the way there, they almost always feel like something's wrong with them, because the world is obsessed with people who figure it out fast. The prodigy, the kid who knew at 19, the overnight success. Nobody makes documentaries about the person who found their stride at 42, and then quietly ran past everyone who peaked at 25. So I want to walk you through the signs you're one of these people. A late bloomer, not a failure, not a slow learner, but someone whose growth curve just bends differently. And I'll be honest, a couple of these are going to feel uncomfortably specific. Let's start with the one almost every late bloomer carries. You felt behind for as long as you can remember. Everyone else seemed to be on some schedule you never got a copy of. They picked a career, you were still questioning yours. They settled down, you were still figuring out who you even were. And that gap became a low background hum of, I'm running out of time. Here's the reframe, though. That ache doesn't come from being slow. It comes from measuring yourself by depth instead of speed. You were never going to be satisfied hitting a milestone just to have hit it. You needed it to actually mean something, and meaning takes longer than motion, which connects directly to the next sign. You took forever to find your thing, because you were quietly collecting range. Most late bloomers have a messy resume, a few careers, a pile of hobbies they got weirdly good at and then dropped. Detours that looked, from the outside, like a lack of direction. And people probably told you to just pick something and stick with it. But here's what was actually happening. While the early bloomers went deep on one narrow track at 20, you were gathering wildly different skills that most people never combine. And late in the game, that range becomes your unfair advantage. You start connecting dots nobody else can even see, because nobody else collected those particular dots. The specialist wins the sprint. The generalist wins the weird, unpredictable long game. And speaking of long games, there's the way you actually learn. You're slow to start and almost impossible to stop. You don't get things instantly. You're not the person who picks up a skill in a weekend and shows off. It takes you a while, sometimes an embarrassingly long while, for something to click. But once it clicks, it's permanent. You don't learn things at the surface. You learn them all the way down, and that kind of knowledge compounds. Early bloomers often plateau because fast learning tends to be shallow learning. You never plateau because you never really stopped digging. 10 years in, the gap between you and the person who got it faster isn't just closed, it's reversed. But none of that compounding happens without the next trait, which is easy to mistake for a flaw. You have to understand why before you'll fully commit to anything. You've probably been called overly cautious. Someone hands you an opportunity, and instead of jumping, you go quiet and you interrogate it. Does this actually fit me? Do I believe in it? Is this mine, or am I just supposed to want it? And yes, this makes you late to a lot of things. You watched people leap into careers, relationships, and ventures while you were still thinking. But watch what happens once a late bloomer finally commits. There's no half in. No quiet quitting 6 months later. Because you didn't commit on impulse. You committed on conviction. And conviction doesn't quit when it gets hard. The people who jumped fast are often the first to bail. You're the one still standing when it finally pays off. Which brings me to something most people can't do at all. You've reinvented yourself more than once. Think about how many versions of you there have already been. Different cities, maybe. Different careers. Whole identities you outgrew and shed. And somewhere along the way you might have felt like that meant you were unstable, or that you kept failing to become one final thing. Flip that. Most people pick an identity in their 20s and then defend it for the rest of their lives, terrified of admitting it stopped fitting. You keep updating. You're willing to become a beginner again at an age when everyone else is clinging to being an expert. That single ability to start over without your ego stopping you is one of the strongest predictors of who succeeds late. And it usually shows up alongside this next quiet sign. Your best moments came from things you did purely because you cared, not because they'd look good. Scroll back through your life for the stuff you're genuinely proud of. I'd bet most of it wasn't strategic. It wasn't for the status or the resume. You did it because it pulled at you, because you couldn't not do it. Late bloomers are often driven by curiosity and meaning way more than by ambition. And early on, that reads as a disadvantage. You're not clawing your way up the obvious ladder. But intrinsic motivation is the only fuel that lasts decades without burning you out. The status chasers flame bright and fade. You're running on something that doesn't run dry. And that endurance sets up the last sign, which might be the one that hits hardest. You still feel, deep down, that your real life hasn't quite started yet. There's this quiet sense that the main event is still ahead of you, that everything so far has been rehearsal or setup or waiting.
And I know how that can feel, like you're perpetually on the runway, never taking off.
But sit with the possibility that the feeling is accurate, that it's not anxiety lying to you, it's potential that genuinely hasn't been spent yet. Early bloomers use themselves up young. You've been holding something in reserve this whole time, whether you meant to or not. That restlessness isn't a malfunction. It's fuel that hasn't found its fire. So if you saw yourself in even a few of those, let me say the thing you've probably needed someone to say for a long time. You are not behind. You're on a different curve. There's a slow curve and a fast curve, and we've built an entire culture that only celebrates the fast one. The early success, the young genius, the person who had it figured out before 30. But the slow curve has a feature the fast one doesn't. It compounds. It keeps bending upward long after the fast curve is flattened out. Carl Jung had this idea that the real work of becoming yourself often doesn't even begin until the second half of life, that the first half is just gathering the raw material. You've been gathering. That was never wasted time. And the list of people who prove this is long. Founders who hit it in their 40s and 50s. Writers who published nothing worth reading until they'd lived enough to have something to say. People whose wasted decade turned out to be the exact thing that made the later work possible. Late isn't lesser. Late is just late. So let me leave you with 3 things to actually do with this. First, stop running your life against other people's clocks. That timeline in your head, the one that says you should have X by a certain age, you didn't write it. You absorbed it. And every time you measure your slow, deep, compounding curve against somebody else's fast, shallow one, you feel like a failure for no real reason. Throw the clock out. Yours runs differently, and that's the whole point. Second, connect your dots on purpose. All that range you collected, all those random skills and detours. Most late bloomers just sit on that pile without realizing it's the treasure. Ask yourself what you can do that almost no one else can, precisely because of your weird, scattered path. That intersection, the thing only you are standing on, is usually where your big late success is hiding. And third, start before you feel ready. This is the hard one, because your whole nature is to understand everything first. But at some point, the understanding becomes the hiding place. You don't need one more year of preparing. You've been preparing your entire life. The bloom doesn't happen while you're studying the soil. It happens when you finally plant the thing. Because here's what I actually believe about you. The feeling of being behind was never evidence that you missed your window. It was the sound of a big engine idling, a lot of capacity that simply hasn't been asked to perform yet. And people like that don't stay idling forever. They just start late, and then they don't stop. So tell me down in the comments, which sign was the one that felt like it was written about you? The first one, the feeling of being behind, or the last one, the sense that your real life still hasn't started? I read all of them, and I think a lot of you are about to realize you're in much better company than you thought. And if this put words to something you've been quietly carrying, subscribe and stick around, because next, I want to get into why the people who take the longest to figure out life often end up understanding it the deepest.